What did you say?
What did you say?
This is Daria Valkenburg. Do you have hearing loss? I do.
I am Annie Lee MacDonald, and I have hearing loss, and I wear 2 hearing aids.
I'm deaf in my right ear. Today's topic deals with the need to get the attention of a person with hearing loss before you start to talk. Our guest for this episode is Joan Gallant, and the 3 of us will discuss some of our challenges and share some experiences in situations that we regularly face, particularly amongst our family and friends. We begin with Joan, who explains how she manages to communicate with her large family. Okay, Joan, what do you think is the reaction of your family to the fact that you have hearing loss? Tell a story about how you only invite one member of one family at a time.
Okay, I could go back a little bit.
Sure.
Because when I first was hard of hearing, the hardest part was my little grandchildren. Somebody had to repeat what they said. I could never hear them. They still may not be that patient. The older ones are great. They're fine. When I invite families, or if I was to invite the whole family, there's 20-some of us, all on the island. I can't do that anymore. And when I did, it's like I was just the cook and the servant because I couldn't follow any conversation with anybody. They all just talked. Now I just invite one family at a time. I can join in the conversation with them, and that works out really, really well. I'm much better with one-on-one. Even if they're talking and there's a number at the table, I would still have trouble unless I'm speaking or listening to the person next to me.
Annie Lee, you would like to add anything?
One of the most difficult situations in our family environment is when my husband and I are in the house alone or when family are there. They tend to forget that I have difficulty hearing, and they're asking me questions from other parts of the house. And of course, I'm usually in the kitchen. I can't hear them. So I have to drop what I'm doing and go to where they are for them to repeat what they asked me so I can answer them properly. That's frustrating sometimes.
Joan, you want to tell the story that there were the 3 of us here. All of us have hearing loss. Annie Lee and I were talking to you from the table while you were at the stove.
I cannot hear if somebody is talking behind my back. And I don't mean that in whatever kind of way, but I just can't hear that way at all. So you have to be sure that you're facing a person when you speak to them if they're hard of hearing.
I just want to add that we tend to forget that there's a strong possibility we are the only one in the family who has a hearing loss. So we don't usually have to adjust our conversation in any way to any of the family members. Like they have to adjust their conversation in order for me to hear properly. But when we go out and we're among other people who are hard of hearing, we tend to forget that we have to treat them as we would like people to treat us. Don't talk to us from behind. Get our attention before you talk to us. And make sure you are close so we are able to hear what you are saying.
That is so true. And that was a good wake-up call.
My son lives with me, and he doesn't matter how many times I've reminded him I cannot hear him if he's in another room. I can't hear him if I have my back to him and I'm washing dishes or cooking something at the stove. And he just continues to go on anyway. And if I've missed the beginning of something, I'm not going to hear the rest anyway. And another thing that others do not understand with people with a cochlear implant, at least mine, it isn't sound so much. I can't tell direction it's coming from. I don't need the television up real loud compared to some other people that come for movie nights. It's the understanding. I can't understand. Even though I can hear the sound, I can't understand what's being said.
Now that's a really good point, that hearing isn't necessarily what you hear, it's how you comprehend it. And hearing is in the brain, and a lot of times it takes us time to process something. And that's why, in my case, quite often my husband doesn't understand that he says something to me, especially if it's something complicated or more than the one or two words. It takes me time to process what he's saying and then formulate an answer. It's almost as if your brain is translating what he says, even though it's the language that you're familiar with. It's almost like he's speaking a foreign language that you're trying to process. I don't know if anybody else finds that.
I think we forget how exhausting it is for us being hard of hearing, because we have to listen so attentively to what a person is saying that you tire easily. It takes time for you to take it in, and then, as you say, to process it. Then, if you've had a visit, an intensive visit for a period of time, then you're exhausted.
If I go for breakfast with the girls, I come back, and by lunchtime, I'm completely exhausted. Mm-hmm. And then my husband says, "Why are you tired? All you did was flap your gums and eat." But of course, you're listening to 15, 25 different voices,
yeah,
including the serving staff and everything, and all the other ambient noises. And it's exhausting trying to process your way. I don't know if you're finding that, Joan.
This is the same thing in my book club. Even though there's only 6 or 7 of us and we sit in a fairly close group, I am exhausted afterward.
Yeah.
Some are private conversations, and sometimes we're just discussing the book, but you have to work so hard to follow. Mm-hmm. It is exhausting.
Mm-hmm. You tend, after you have had a hearing loss for a number of years, and you have made every effort to be able to communicate effectively, then you tend to use your strategies. Don't try to talk to somebody in the midst of a conversation. Ask them about it later to get all of the facts that you didn't get originally, rather than being a part of the whole conversation that is going on in the room among many different people. Those are strategies that we've learned to apply to make it easier for us to socialize and not feel that we're being left out.
I've found that I have stopped going to things like meetings because they're too exhausting and I can't really hear most of what's being said and don't want to ask for somebody to repeat, even though they know I'm hard of hearing. So I tend to do things in just small gatherings, 2 or 3 people, or something like golf where you're just with one person, or bowling where you don't have to really hear because you're doing something, an activity.
Wow, lots to take in with the 3 of us talking, isn't there? But here are the 4 main points to use when talking with somebody who has hearing loss. Number 1, get our attention before you get into the subject of your conversation. Call up a name or tap us lightly on the shoulder. Number 2, face us when you want to talk to us. It's much easier to understand you if we can see you. Number 3, don't try to talk to us if you're in another room. The chances are all we'll hear is And number 4, give us time to process what you've said before you expect a reply. Think of it as though we are translating what you said from a different language into English. Do you have a tip or story that you want to share? Email us at hearpei@gmail.com. That's hearpei@gmail.com. Catch you next time. This podcast was sponsored by a grant from Resourceabilities with excellent technical production by Wendy Natras. We hope you enjoyed this podcast and have learned some new tips and tricks for hearing loss accessibility.
In today's world, you're hearing all kinds of sounds, and you must have coping strategies to be able to hear what you want to hear and be able to put in the background what you don't want to hear.
Join us on our next podcast of What Did You Say?
What did you say?